anesthesia every single day, cut open their chest, do all these painful things. So why am I seeing torturous deaths? And so that was my research question. And so I started to research that. I mean, this is what law professors do, and professors generally, right? We find an interesting question and we research the heck out of it, and then we write a paper, and that's what we do. So this was normal for me, and I started researching it, and by the end of 2017, I realized this is a book, and I did not want to write a book. And when Grace said I had two veins of my scholarship, my other one is legal history. And I'll tell you, the project before this project was a legal history piece. It's called the Counter-Majoritarian Classics. And I had workshopped it at faculties, and those faculties had said, there's a lot stuffed in here, this needs book-length treatment. And I so didn't want to write a book, I put that piece down. So I put that piece down, then I go to do the death penalty thing, and this thing is insisting upon being a book, and I didn't want to write a book, so I put it down too. And so by January 2018, I go to this law professor conference. But frankly, I rarely go. It's called the American Association of Law Professors. So it's AALS, the American Association of Law Schools. But it's the annual law professor thing. It's early January. I never go. In 24 years, I think I've gone 3 or 4 times. Because I'm always tired from the holidays. And the new semester is about to start, and so, it's just a mess when you go. But this year, it was in 2018, in January 2018, it was in San Diego. And I had never been to San Diego, let alone in January, let alone on my law school's dime. So I was like, I do want to go to that conference. So I went, and the way law professors relate to each other, probably all academics, are like, hi, how are you? What are you working on? 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 And, it was very stressful for me, and I told you about the legal history piece that I set down, because I want you to know, I went to that conference. That legal history piece was about 18 months worth of work. I had already put in a year on this other. I hadn't published anything in 3 years. And in my world, which is a publish or perish, what have you done lately? It was internally stressful and it was externally stressful. I was not one of the cool kids. And so after one particularly stressful lunch, I actually skipped the 1 o'clock session. I went back up to my hotel room, and now I will be very personal. The rest of this is just very, very personal, but I'm, so happy and honored, frankly, to share it here. But I call myself a free-range chicken Christian because I don't belong to a church, but I have a deep and abiding faith. And I got on my knees and I prayed, and it was like, Lord, I don't want to write a book. And I don't want to write a book on lethal injection. And it was like, here are all the ways this would be bad for me. It would take years more, right? This is going to be a thing. I'm going to be walking in super darkness. I don't really want to, study executions. But it was like, but if I knew this is what you were calling me to, if I knew that this is what I'm supposed to be doing, that would change everything. Really, I remember my words so clearly. I was like, but I'm not inclined to do it. So if this is from you, then speak clearly. And I wasn't really reading my Bible like I am now, but I didn't bring a Bible or anything. I'm kneeling against the bed, and I just reached over to see if there was a Gideon's Bible. And there was, and I cracked it open, and it cracked. I'm not sure that book had ever been opened, but whatever. Anyway, I opened it up, and this is the first picture. I took a picture of it, because that's what I do. I document things. But I just opened it up, and this is the top left. And it opens, and the first thing I read, Psalm 45, My heart is overflowing with a good theme. I recite my composition concerning the king. My tongue is the pen of a ready writer. And I said, well, shit. I guess I'm gonna write a book on lethal injection. And that's really why I wrote this book, is I'll go to my grave saying I was called to write this book. And it began a really wild ride. So I wrote through cancer in 2019. I had breast cancer. I wrote through COVID in 2020 with everyone in my home. And so it took years. By January 2022, I had a draft of that book. So including the 2017 year, this is 5 years later. And I went into it going, okay, what kind of book is it? And so many of the things that I was finding and researching this thing, I was like, what? Are you kidding me? Right? No way. Everyone should know this. And half the time I was saying, how did I not know this? I'm supposed to be some kind of death penalty expert. How in the world did I not know any of this? And if I didn't know this, then nobody knows this. And so I really wanted a book for the public. And so, in January 2022, I was like, okay, let me try to get what we call a trade press. That's a book for the public that you'd see in Barnes & Noble. These are, Random House and Norton and that sort of thing. And to get one of those contracts, publication contracts, you need an agent. So it's like, okay, let me see if I can get an agent. If I can get an agent, then that door opens, then I'll go forward, and if not, then I'll do this academic thing. And I got an agent right away. And by the way, if you Google it, because of course, Mr. Google is always right, but if you Google it, the chances of getting an agent are like 1 to 6,000. Really, really hard to get an agent. I got an agent right away. So I'm like, here we go. This is great. It's been 5 years. I've done it. She could not give away my book. She was a really, really good agent. In some ways, maybe too good, but because, I'm not a novelist. I'm not a repeat player. I'm just a random law professor. But she was Maria Shriver's agent and Mary Tyler Moore's agent. And so she knew all the people. And she's like, we're going to go. I know the person here. And she submitted to all of the big presses, and they all said no. One by one, they all said no. And then she said, well, you didn't want to be in that big press. You'd get lost in there. You want a medium press. And so she submitted to all the medium presses. And one by one, they all said no. And then she said, you know what? Small presses, they're going to love you. So we're going to do small. You're going to be a big deal for them. And one by one, they all said no. And then she got to these specialty presses. There are social justice presses. And she said, come on, it's an abolitionist book. There is no book on lethal injection. They're going to love this. Come on. And one by one, they all said no. And fast forward to December 7th. So let me tell you, I came into January with a draft of that book after having writing for 5 years. And it took a year of all no's. And not only all no's, but I've come to understand that different agents have different ways of being with their authors. Most of them meet with their authors maybe every week, maybe every other week, and say, okay, here's who we've heard from, and no themes emerging, just keep doing it, or maybe there's a theme, you need to spice it up, so work on that. No, my agent just forwarded the no's. Don't like it, no one's gonna read it, don't know who the audience is. It was brutal for an entire year. It's all no's. My faculty stopped asking me how the book was coming. My dean, you're not gonna get another research grant? It was a little rough. And on December 7th, we had 2 left, and my agent said, you know what, I have a great feeling about this. Because They've had it for 2 weeks. It takes about 2 weeks. Doesn't take as much time to reject. It takes about 2 weeks. If you've had it, we're going to hear. And she said, I really feel good about this. And within an hour and a half on that day, they both came in no. And her last email to me was, I'm so sorry, Corinna, there's nothing more I can do. So it was just like, right? So I cried in my office. And I was actually supposed to go out and have a drink with a new law professor, where we were going to have a mentoring session at a certain off-site beverage establishment. And so I wrote to her, I texted her and was like, boy, am I ready. It's been a terrible day. And she said, oh, I wrote the date wrong. I'm at my daughter's school, we're gonna have to reschedule. No problem, easy peasy. And I packed up my stuff and I went home and cried again, had a big cry. And you know, I was kneeling against my couch. I'm about to show you the next picture. But you know, I was kneeling against my couch in the home office, and it's like my faith in the book was dead. My faith in the Lord was not. And so I was like, well, they all, like every one of them said no. So obviously that's not happening because they all said no. And you know, it was like, Lord, I don't understand what you're doing. I had confirmation in those 5 years. Like I had encouragements. I knew I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. And so for every one of them to say no, I just was like, was this about obedience? Was this about drawing me closer to you? Like, I don't understand what this was about, but I need to know you're still there. Like, I need to hear from you now. And I mean, like, tears are streaming down my face. I need to hear from you. And I took my home Bible and I just flipped it open, which has been my habit since that fateful day in San Diego. And come on, baby. Well, I can do it another way. There we go. And it opened to this, that's my couch, by the way, that I was crying against. But it opened to the book of Habakkuk. And I literally was like, what the is Habakkuk? You know, and I'm flipping through, it's a 2-page book of the Bible. And of all those 5 years of just, saying a morning prayer and just opening, like, what have you got for me, Lord? Not one time had it ever turned to Habakkuk. So I'm like, what even is this? And you can see, this is the top left. And I'm going to read it for the people in the back. And the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables that he may run that read it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. So I cried again, I took a picture. But, I was like, okay, in that moment, I was like, I don't know how it's gonna happen, because they all said no, but it is going to happen. And what's interesting is that as I was driving home, I was like, okay, well, I guess it's an academic press, so I guess I need to write it again and make it like bigger words and more academic-y. And that's not what Habakkuk told me to do. What Habakkuk was telling me was make it plain upon tables. So it's like, I know the world is telling you go for an academic press. I'm telling you, double down on a trade press. Make it even more plain. I'm like, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. And then 2 weeks later, I was in my bedroom, and I have an old Army Bible. I was in the Army, and I was given, that's where I had my encounter with the Lord, and I was given this big chain link Bible that it's just so big. And, but I was in my bed, my husband was gone, and we have hardwood floors, and it was December. And I was like, I could do my reading here in bed. So I grab it, and I just open it, and it opens to Habakkuk. I had not opened that Bible in well over a decade. It had dust on the side, sorry, but it's true. Anyway, it opens to Habakkuk. That was December 20th. And the nice thing, you can't see the dates, but like the dates are on all of my pictures. And so I remember them. And then I have this other Bible. I only have 3 in my life, I'm just saying. But this is my work Bible. And whenever I keep it under my desk, and whenever I write on the death penalty, I open it and I do a reading and I do a little prayer. And it's more, mercy on all of those, on the victims' families, on all of the destruction. And also protect my heart as I walk through darkness and give me clarity. So I always do a reading before I write on the death penalty. That was never, ever public. No one ever knew that until I started sharing my story. So it's just like it sits under there and I just like do it. So this was January 20th. I open my work Bible and it opens to the passage of Habakkuk. And I'm like, 3 Bibles, that's the only Bibles I have, all within a month. December 7th, December 20th, January 7th, they all opened to Habakkuk, and it's 2 pages. And I'm like, come on, right? So the last thing about this is sometime in the spring, and I really don't remember, it was maybe March or April, I was getting a pedicure. My daughters got me hooked on them, and then they went to college. How dare they? And so I went to get a pedicure. It was a Sunday, and because it was a Sunday, I was like, I'm going to put in my AirPods, and I Googled Waiting on God sermon, because that's the season I was in. And I mean, understand, this has like now been 15 months of just no. And so, the first thing that pops up is this sermon, Waiting on God, by someone named Stephanie Ike. Never heard of her, but I'm like, hit play. About 15 minutes in, she says, 16 minutes, she says, now I'd like to turn to a little known passage in the book of Habakkuk. And there it is. The vision waits its appointed time. At the end it shall speak. And she gives this, this little sermon on Habakkuk. So I'm like, one of the questions in my mind is, if I hadn't heard, if I wasn't being chased by this verse, would I have moved? I don't know. But, I had my mentors were saying, I had one actually hit the table at a lunch saying, the world needs this book. What are you waiting for? Get the academic press, let's go. And I'm like, I think I'm gonna wait. What are you waiting on? I don't know. But there's this book called Habakkuk, and he was like, I'm an atheist. I'm like, it's okay, I'm just telling you, all I can do is share what is happening to me. So anyway, I was waiting, and I was gonna keep waiting. And in May, I did a talk in Puerto Rico. I'm walking through what I call the gauntlet. That's the little booths to get my badge. And there's NYU Press over there with this little booth. And people had told me, NYU Press is known for their criminal justice titles, and also NYU Press has a trade press line. But I had heard from Habakkuk, so I wasn't doing anything. But I walked by, and she's just sitting there, not talking to nobody, so I just stopped and said, excuse me, is it true that NYU Press has a trade press line? And she said, yeah, it is, I'm the one who does it. Why, you got a book? And I said, well, I do, but I'm waiting. And she said, no problem, tell me about your book. So I told her about my book, and she said, if you don't mind, why did you write a book on lethal injection? And I said, I know this is weird, you don't know me, but I'll go to my grave saying I was called to write this book. And I showed her the picture. I said, you asked why I wrote it, this is why I wrote it. And I said, I know that's really weird, you don't even know me. And she said, no, it's not weird at all, my mom's a Methodist minister. Really? And 6 or 7 weeks later, I had a contract with NYU Press in their trade press line. And I sit there now and think, I wanted that trade, maybe not Random House or Norton, but I wanted that so badly because I wanted to reach the people. But the Lord had a better plan, because it's like what I really needed was to have the academic. I'm slinging some pretty big things at the state in this. I mean, it's called Secrets of the Killing State. And as I say in the intro, I brought the receipts. You know, so there's a lot of big claims I'm making. And it was really, I look back now and say, for what I'm doing, I needed the backing of a top-notch academic press behind me, and yet I threaded the needle because they have a trade press line. So 2 more things I'll just mention, and that is, one is, as soon as I signed the contract with NYU Press, a writing retreat in Rome for free fell upon me. And I was on sabbatical, and you know, these sabbaticals are once every 7 years. You don't delay them, you can't front load them. It just, like, this is when it's happening. And it just so happened that I got my contract as I was going into my sabbatical year. So it was like, oh, okay, I have this sabbatical time to finish the manuscript, turn it in, all of that. And my law school roommate, Katie, lives in Rome. She's godmother of my children, and she's general counsel for one of the UN organizations. It's IFAD, it's actually International Finance Agriculture Development, so they fight world hunger. And she travels every fall, and usually her husband stays with her big dogs, but this year couldn't happen. She was saying, I don't know what I'm gonna do with my dogs. And I said, Katie, I'll be your dog sitter, and I'll use it as a writing retreat. And I did it, and you know, 3 days later I get there and she's like, oh, Corinna, I forgot to tell you. I have this woman, she's on salary, but I have to give her hours. She's on salary through the UN. Do you mind if she comes and cooks for you 3 days a week? I know, right? It's laughable. I'm like, let me pay her. And she's like, no, she's on salary. So like, this whole thing falls. For me, I spend 5 weeks in Rome writing the manuscript, finishing the manuscript, trying to make it plain. Spend a lot of time on chapter 3, which is torturous drugs. That's the pharmacology chapter. And I wrote it and wrote it and wrote it and researched and updated and tried to make it plain. But that was mainly what I was working on there. But, you know, it's the week before I leave, and I had been to Rome, I had been to the Vatican twice before, and knew I would go again because Katie's there. But I had, you know, I'm like, you gonna go back to Richmond, Virginia and say, yeah, I lived in Rome for 5 weeks and didn't bother to see the Sistine Chapel? Like, really? And I was like, yeah, no. Let me see if I can get into the Vatican. What are the chances I can get a ticket to the Vatican in 5 days? 0. Like, you can't do that. But I was like, is there any, I didn't care about going to the Vatican Museum, but I'm like, is there any way I can sit inside, I can get myself inside the Sistine Chapel? I just want to sit there and I want to talk to the Lord and see the beauty. And I found a way. You could buy a ticket to walk through the Vatican Gardens. It's a tour of the Vatican Gardens and the Sistine Chapel. So the Vatican Gardens were not on my list, but I'm like, I'll walk through gardens. Also, even then I couldn't get it in English. It's in Italian, I don't speak Italian. So when I showed up, I didn't even get the little headphoney things, because I'm not gonna understand anything. I put in my Jesus Jams playlist that I had made over the years in writing the book, and I'm walking through the Vatican. I don't know, I'm in a group of like 15, 20, but I'm completely by myself because they're watching her head move, and I'm just like by myself talking to the Lord about all of the things that had happened. And I'm taking pictures of rose bushes and statues. And I go to take a picture of this fountain. And because it had little frogs on the side, and my husband's an environmental lawyer and he has frog cufflinks, so I'm like, oh, John will like this. I go to take a picture of a fountain, and a white dove photobombed my picture. And he didn't land. And everybody else is like scrambling to take this picture. And if I hadn't been already taking the picture, and it's perfect, you know. I asked the tour guide, because they do speak English, but I was like, Dova? Like, that's not a pigeon, right? You know, like Dova? And she's like, Dova. And I asked her, do they just have those? I don't know. I never walked the Vatican Gardens. Maybe they just have those running around. And she said, no, they have songbirds. But apparently the Pope had released 2 doves when Russia invaded Crimea, and black crows came and attacked them in front of people and ate them. And I was like, did that happen? I went back and Googled that. That did happen. But so she was like, no, there's no more, you know, like no white doves. And she said she had been doing tours of the gardens for 10 years and had never seen one. So there's that. I'll just say one other thing about, you know, this is one last thing, and it's about where I find myself right now on this tour. So the book comes out in April. I mean, that too. So NYU Press chose Easter 2025 as the release date for this book. And the manuscript was due in January. They said it takes about 18 months. That would be June 2025, and they basically said, I hate to break it to you, but this is not a beach read. So if we all work together, Easter's late this year, we'll do an Easter release date. Good time to think about state killing, redemption. They don't even know half the stuff that, you know, and I'm like, yes, great. Listen, that was a year before the Pope declared 2025 the year of the Jubilee, and declared ending the death penalty to be the theme of the 2025 Jubilee. So I was just like, what is happening? And so anyway, the book comes out, and because it came out in April, look, I just finished my 24th year in academia, so I just know people. That's all. And, you know, people have been watching me struggle with this book for years and said, you know, when it comes out, we'll have you give a talk. And so we couldn't do that in April because that's the exam period and then the summer. So this fall is my first opportunity. And I looked at it and said, well, I've got invitations at UNC in South Carolina, in Atlanta, FSU, University of Alabama, Texas. I was like, you know, I think I could drive this thing. And then as long as I'm going to drive this thing, I could actually stop and do bookstore talks and talk, like, reach as many people as I possibly can. And by the way, at this point, I just have to give the shout out to my sister because I would not be able to do this without her. She looked and said, you're gonna need somebody. And she was right. But anyway, so I was like, you know, I think, and also I teach 10 credits a year and 8 of them are in the fall. And so I was like, I'm not gonna be able to do this. I'm gonna take a professional leave and just go out and drive. So I took a professional leave and I thought, how much is this gonna run? I'm gonna hire a publicist to like do the bookstore thing. So I get this estimate. It was May 26th when the estimate comes in. And I look at it and go, oh. I call my husband, who has a new name for me. He now calls me affectionately Professor Moneyhole. But he said, you know, we'll work it out. But I mean, it was a thing. And so I talked to him, and then I got on my knees again. This will be the last picture I show you. But I got on my knees and said, Lord, you know I'm a yes. I've been a yes. I'm a yes. I've been a yes. But it's prohibitive. And I remember praying like, they're not going to like what I have to say. You know, they love their death penalty. They're not going to like me. They're going to be mean. And also, I don't know that I can change a thing. But Lord, you know, if this is what you're calling me to, you know how, I was like, you know how to speak clearly to me. You know, all I ask is speak clearly. If this is what you're calling me to, I'm a yes. And I flipped open my Bible, and it opened to Ezekiel chapter 2. And I'm going to read it because there's just so many words. And he said unto me, Son of man, stand upon my feet, I'll speak unto thee. And the Spirit entered unto me, and I heard him, ... For they are impudent children and stiff-hearted, ... I do send thee unto them. And thou shalt say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God, and whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, for they are a rebellious house. Yet they shall know there's been a prophet among them. I am not a prophet. I'm just a girl with a testimony, right? But, and thou, son of man, be not afraid of them. Neither be afraid of their words, though briars and thorns be with thee. Do not be afraid of their words, nor dismayed at their looks. They are a rebellious house. And thou shalt speak my words unto them, whether they will hear, whether they will forbear, for they are most rebellious. But thou, son of man, hear what I say. Be not rebellious like that rebellious house. Open thy mouth, eat what I give thee. And when I looked, behold, a hand was sent unto me, and lo, the roll of a book was therein. And I just said, well, I guess I'm gonna do a book tour. I'm gonna drive all over the place. And that's where I am now. So this is, I always feel like, and I should have said this earlier, but, I look back and say, okay, there was a call to write, a call to wait, and a call to go. And this book tour is my response to the call to go. And I guess I just wanted to spend this time to share with you what I don't generally share. I gave a talk at FSU Law School today and said, there's a whole faith journey behind this. It's on my website. But I wanted to share that here. And I'll just tell you, I wrote a conclusion. I thought it was a good conclusion. I liked it. And my editor was like, great conclusion, why don't we ditch it? I want you to write an epilogue instead. And I was like, don't judge me, but I was like, what's the difference? Like, what are you asking me to do? And she said, I want you to talk about how this has changed you. I want you to be personal. This whole thing has been on research, and you do put your voice in there, but I want you to talk about how this has changed your views. And so I ended up writing about redemption on death row. And one of the things I say, I'm a former prosecutor, and even though I've been writing about the death penalty for nearly 20 years, I had always kept my emotional distance from the condemned, faceless, condemned capital murderers that I've been writing about all these years. But this project, it wasn't about the people, it was about lethal injection. But studying lethal injection is studying executions. And studying executions gave me a front row seat as to who these people are at the end. Not who they were at the time of their terrible, terrible crimes. Not who they were at the time of trial. Who are they 15, 20, 25, 30 years later? And what I found and what I wrote about in this little 3-page epilogue that I sometimes wonder might be the most important 3 pages of the whole book. But what I wrote is they're not the same people. They're not the same. Mississippi just executed this summer a guy, he'd been on death row for 49 years. 49 years. He's nowhere near the same guy. And then what do we do about the fact that for those victims' families, these people, I don't comment on it, I just tell the stories. But they get wheeled in a wheelchair. You have to prop their head up on a pillow because they're on oxygen and they don't want them to suffocate while they kill them. The executioners are patting them on the shoulder and saying, we're going to try to, get the vein, we're going to try to do this as best we can. Or they've been redeemed and they come in and they've started a prison ministry. Listen, we execute, I say we, in our name, executed a guy this summer. He'd been on death row for 27 years and found faith. People started calling him pastor. He was like, I'm not educated. I'm not a pastor. He said that again and again. I'm not a pastor, but he started the Church of Death Row, for death row. And the prison chaplain told the media, I don't know any of these people, by the way, but the prison chaplain told the media, scarcely have I encountered such holiness in my life. And he said, this man was reaching people that none of us could reach. We've been trying for decades. It took this man to say, I know the depths of despair. You are loved. And I think what's happening is with so many of them, and look, I say, many of them die praying to Allah or Jehovah or, Jesus as they die. Most of the time it is Christ, but not always. But they, and I think what's happened, as far as I can tell, is, over the years, like they can't run to drugs or alcohol. They can't escape what they did. And they're filled with such loathing, such self-loathing. By the way, 10% of all of the people we execute in this country are volunteers. They're just kill me. I deserve it, And then of course the conditions are so bad. But I think for most of them, it's I either need to take myself out, I hate myself, or I have to find forgiveness. I have to find a source of love, that I am loved. And then to believe, as I have seen, one guy's like, the fact that even I could be loved made me want to respond with love and change my whole life. And so one of the lines in that epilogue is, as Saul became Paul, so it is for many on death row. It's like these people are not the same people. And I kind of want to scream out there and just, say, hey, all you people, I want you to know you're killing your Pauls. That's what you're really killing. You're killing your Pauls. And you're killing your Sauls who could be Pauls. And so what I've seen is we are killing someone who has killed, presumably, we get it right. Somebody who has killed, but is no longer a killer. But then who are we creating when we ask someone to kill in our names, to kill for a job? And so I have part of that book in chapter 8, I talk about the prison staff. I just quote them. And I'm now moving into the book, but, this is not a book where I make an argument and try to convince you I'm right. This is a book where I just relentlessly document what the state is doing in our name. It's just storytelling. People say it reads like investigative journalism, and I'm like, well, it's not my journalism, but I've gotten into the investigative journalism and the litigation files, and I've just put it together, and I'm just telling story after story after story. But one of the things that I found was that the executioners are by the time a warrant comes down, we've been living with this person for 20 years. And we know they're not the same person, and we know they could be safely housed, Corinna Barrett-Lain, for millions less. And they say, then a warrant comes down and we have to kill them. And you can't expect that there won't be damage from that. And so I document, divorce, suicidal, drug addiction, alcoholism, weight gain, weight loss, depression, all of the things. And it just makes me step back and, look and say, wow, look at how destructive this thing is. Wow. Last thing I'll say, and then maybe I could talk about what you would like to talk about, but I will just say I started my research project asking why are states so bad at this? And at some point in the midst of my research, my question changed. And it became, why are states sticking with lethal injection? What is it They can't get the medical professionals. They can't get the drugs. They can't get access to the veins. These people are older. They're elderly. Most of them are former drug, IV users. They have poor health, so they have notoriously bad veins. Doing a massive bolus overdose into those weak veins is like, it's just, it's like literally stupid, It costs a gazillion dollars. Arizona spent $1.5 million on drugs for 3 executions and botched all 3. I document them breaking state laws, breaking federal laws, and getting their drugs seized by the FDA, by the DEA. I document, this is Idaho, they took $15,000 in cash, put it in a suitcase, chartered a plane to Washington, and did an under-the-table drug deal, allegedly in a Walmart parking lot. And when this broke, the state came out and was like, it was not a Walmart parking lot. And I'm like, that's your problem, is that it wasn't in a Walmart parking lot? Okay. But, and it's not even humane. So I'm like, what? It's so expensive. It's so hard. Why? This is like the rock of Sisyphus. Why are you pushing this uphill? And what I've come to conclude is that lethal injection just does one thing well. Only one. And that is, it hides the violence of state killing. With lethal injection, you don't have to see the sight of blood, like with the firing squad. You don't have to smell the sickly smell of burning flesh. That's the electric chair. You don't have to see gasping and retching and seizing on the gurney. That is nitrogen gas. We get to tell ourselves that people are drifting off to forever sleep. It's not true, but it allows us to tell ourselves that. And I think that makes it easier to not think about what the death penalty actually is. When we talk about this death penalty, when we debate it in this country, it's as an idea, right? It stands for law and order. It's an idea, and it's like, are you for it or against it? Often on tribal lines. Lethal injection is doing tremendous work in keeping the death penalty as an idea. I was thinking of this saying I had heard, and it was, the heart stops reluctantly. The heart stops reluctantly. It's not in the book, but I kind of wish it was. But, the point was, before the body is ready to give up life on its own, it takes force to stop the heart from beating. It could be a car accident, it could be a homicide, it could be an execution, but the heart wants to keep beating until it doesn't. And so it takes force, it takes violence, it takes physical force to stop the heart from beating. And what's special about lethal injection is it internalizes that force. So we don't have to deal with it, we don't have to see it. And I do believe, out of sight, out of mind. Nothing to see here, move along. And so, so part of my project is to change that to the extent I can. So I didn't talk like a ton about the book, but I've talked a whole lot. So maybe we could just pause here and then talk about what I wrote the book, so I'm ready to talk about it. But what are your reactions, or what do you want to know, or what do you want to talk about? Yes, ma'am.
I was struck by your comments at the end there about how they like lethal injection, because I was going to ask you a question about the opposite, and that is that states seem to be moving away from it. And here in Florida, they just passed a law that we can kill people anyway that is okay with the Constitution. And I'm curious, since you're studying this, if you have a sense of why that movement away is happening. Is it because of the shortage of drugs, or they're just anticipating there'll be a change? I was just curious about that.
Yeah, for real. So, the interesting thing is, when the manuscript went in, it was still all lethal injection. Lethal injection is responsible for 98% of all executions over the last 45 years. But you're right, like the book goes in, and there was actually a stop the press moment where I knew a week after the thing would go to press that Alabama was going to have its first nitrogen gas. And so I told NYU, I need to address this. Now, South Carolina had not turned to the firing squad, like that just hadn't happened yet, so it's nowhere in the book. But, what I think, in answer to your question, is they can't get the drugs. They can't get the drugs. And they really can't get the medical professionals to do it. So this is part of the reason why it's just a hot mess. And one of the narratives that I, address is there's this saying, it's like, it's all abolitionists' fault. And so I take that apart. And I'm like, no, the fault is having an execution method that requires a product whose producers are against it being used in executions. That is endemic. That is inherent in what lethal injection is. And so really what's remarkable is why haven't they moved sooner? Why haven't they? And here's an interesting thing. So South Carolina used the firing squad, right? South Carolina has a 3-person firing squad, no blanks. The first one happened, and by the way, the prisoner wears a dark shirt, a jean shirt, and a white target over their heart. These shooters are 10 to 15 feet.
Wow.
It's nothing, right? Like you're right up on them. So the first one happens. The second one gets botched. And it's like, what's that all about? So there's 3 shooters. He gets shot. He does die, but it takes minutes. And the state said, no, went off without a hitch. All 3, there was no malfunction. All of the bullets, everything went as it was supposed to. The autopsy comes back, 3 shooters, 3 bullets, 2 bullet holes. And the state has the audacity to say, oh, that's because 2 bullets went in the same hole. Okay, I'm glad you laughed, because I laughed too. I was like, come on. I happened to qualify as an expert shot with the M16A1. I was a training sergeant for marksmanship. So I'm like, stop treating us like we're stupid, right? So there's no way that's possible, but that's the official line. And what's interesting is that the second and third bullets, like the 2 that hit him, neither one of them hit the heart. Both hit him in the gut. And that's why he suffered. But so there are some people out there that, there was a doctor, an ER doctor, who's seen thousands of bullet wounds, and he came out and said, this was purposeful. Like, I don't know how you could miss. Come on. These are people who train, it's 10 to 15 feet, come on. I could hit a 300-meter prop-up in 3 seconds. I'm not saying I could now, but I'm just saying, there's no reason for them to have missed. So some people are saying, well, he killed a police officer. He was a black man. I think they made him suffer. We'll never know, but I'll tell you my theory. My theory is actually just the opposite. My theory is, I don't think they talked to each other. I think one of those shooters were like, I am not going to shoot this man. Not for my job. And they talk about how, they're harmless by the time they come in and you're killing them. They're, safely housed forever. And so I think one of them was, not doing it. That bullet's going to go somewhere else. And I think the other 2, again, just my instinct from researching executions for 7 years. I think the other two both said, I'll shoot him, but I'm not going to be the one that kills him. I want the other guy to be the one that kills him. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to the Lord with a murder on my hands. I don't know that. Again, I'd bet my house on it if I could prove it, but I can't. But, it goes to this notion of these alternatives. I mean, I'll tell you, lethal injection, just its benefit of looking like you fall asleep is so important to maintaining the death penalty today. I think it's a linchpin. I'm not saying it's the only, but it's doing a lot of work. And, these other methods are more violent. We're obviously violent, and we're seeing people saying, you're gassing people, you're shooting people. That's what China does. Like, we're taking people out and shooting them, and so it's like you're seeing some of that outrage, and, I'm kind of like, yeah, well, I've said this. If you don't like the sight of blood and you think that's really gross, I hate to break it to you, but that's what the death penalty is, right? It is the state shedding blood in your name. So if you don't like that, that's what it is. And it only seems gross to you because we've hidden what it is for so long. That was way longer than the answer to your question, but I'm like, does anyone else dare ask a question? Andy?
You just mentioned China. Can you talk a little bit about how the U.S. kind of lands?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. The United States, most people don't know, we are an outlier in the world. And the top executioners are China. In 2023, the United States was one of the top 5. It was China, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Iran, and then the United States. And then in 2024, I think Iraq had a bunch, and so we slipped to 7. But it was like, it's us and the most famous human rights abusers. It's really, really interesting company that we keep on that. And I think I taught on international perspectives of the death penalty class this summer at University of Cambridge in England. And so these students were like, what? They were just like, wow. And they just were like, the United States is so big, we're the 1,000-pound gorilla in the room. And so we compare to other states. We don't even think about the fact that we're the only Western democracy that kills its own people on purpose, with other people filing into a room to watch. Like, when you step back and think about that, that's what they were like, wait a minute. So they set a date and people file into a room to watch the state kill somebody. I'm like, yep, that's what it is. But we don't think about that. But we should.
So I have
No, please.
That made me want to ask you, what was the reaction of the law students you spoke with today?
It was unbelievable. I was nervous. I was, because FSU is actually known as, FSU Law is known as a very conservative school, among law schools anyway.
No kidding.
Okay. And I had been told, not very many students are going to come. So that's okay. Thinking to myself, open thy mouth, eat what I give you. It's okay. And I later found out that the flyer didn't actually go around. But one of the students, wait a minute, it was you. I think you connected me to Professor Collinson, who then connected me to students. And the students got a hold of it. And the students made the copies. And I later heard they're all over the place, but they hadn't been distributed. And it didn't, so one of the students this afternoon said, Professor Lain, we students, we go where there's food. Like this is a noontime, lunchtime thing. And he said, your flyer did not say that there was any food. And he said, there was food, but it didn't say. And he said, so all of those students, they came not even knowing that they thought it was going to be a dry lunch, and yet they came. And the professor that hosted me, he wrote earlier in the week and said, you've got 25 students. Wow, that's incredible. Because, they don't really come to these things. I thought, let's see. How many was it? Like 60? 60 people. 60 people came. They had a count of 25 because you were supposed to RSVP, and I had a student reach out and say, well, I didn't RSVP, so I want to meet you, but then I won't go. And I was like, you should go, and you should stay. But it was 60 students, and here's an interesting thing too. I don't know. Sometimes I just look and go, wow. But I had a meeting this morning with the Catholic Conference. Catholic Conference, 2 people, and they were really great. And I shared a lot of my testimony, not as much as I did here, but I shared a lot of it. And at the end, they were like, what's your schedule today? I said, well, I've got this. And he said, Michael, was okay, yeah. And he said, well, I'm going to come to your FS View event. And I'm like, okay, And he came early, he said a prayer over me and said, by the way, I reached out to a judge and he's gonna be there. I don't know who it was, I never met him. Kind of a stocky guy. So I don't know what that was about, but but as far as the reaction, they were engaged, they were outraged. I talked about the paralytic that Florida uses, and how it's also a muscle relaxant. So it relaxes the muscles in your face and then it freezes them that way. So you can get this nice drifting off to sleep look, no matter what's actually happening. And the autopsies show us what is actually happening. And I talked to them one moment where I heard like audible gasps, where I told them, that anesthesiologists have said, listen, as someone's being paralyzed, look for like little itty bitty movements in their fingers, because that's the place that we actually have the most control. And so even as they're like all that they have, and they can't move, but like, if they're struggling and doing all that they can, you might see a little movement in their fingers. And I hope this isn't disturbing. I know some people work, with people who've been executed, but, so I said to them, this is well known, anesthesiologists have come out and said so. What did Florida do? It tapes down their fingers. And now 2 other states have started taping down the fingers also. But it's like, and I was able to say to them, there's no legitimate reason at all, none, for that to happen. I'm sorry. So, yeah, I'm sorry to, these are tough conversations, and anyway, so, yes, ma'am.
I have 2 questions. One is, when you named the other method of execution, you left out hanging, and I'm kind of interested in that because I know that was in our lifetimes.
Yes, it was.
And the other thing is the cost difference between the drugs that are used in the hospital that give a more peaceful exit, and the cost for the drugs that are used for the state executions. If you happen to know that.
Yeah. So the first as to hanging. So when the settlers came over, when the Pilgrims came over, this is 1608 Jamestown, they came over with hanging. That was, how they originally did it. Although The very first execution in what would become the United States was in Jamestown. Jamestown settlement was 1607. The very first execution was 1608, and it was of an officer. And so he was able to be executed by shooting. That was considered an honor, he got to be shot instead of hung. But they came over with hanging, and I'll tell you what happened there is, over time, two things were happening with these public hangings, because of course they were all public. And one was among certain classes, this is how they talk about it, among certain classes it was rowdy, it was like festival-like, and it was really the more genteel.
Hanging tree and bringing picnic baskets.
Yeah, exactly, right? But other people looking at this were like, this is getting gross to me. And then there were some big botched executions by hanging. And I think one of those was responsible for Michigan ending the death penalty, right? And so people were like, ooh, we need to move this indoor where it's not in public because it threatens the death penalty itself. So they did that. And then in 1890, there was actually a study. It was done in New York, and it was looking for an alternative to hanging because they found that hanging wasn't the humane death that they had claimed it was. And in that report, they recommended the electric chair. But what's interesting to me is that in that report, and I talk about it in the book, in that report, they actually considered and rejected lethal injection. They didn't call it that, but they said, we've also considered death by drugs, and they said, we reject, this is not viable for two reasons. One, they called anatomical difficulties. They're like, these people have bad veins. And I'm like, how could you know that in 1890 and not know that in 1977? And the other reason they said was the universal opposition of the medical profession, which again, I'm like, the medical profession showed up here in Florida, other states, as they were considering lethal injection statutes, and they said, do not do this. You cannot do it competently without us, and we're not going to help you. The allure of a death that looks like just falling to sleep was just too much. So that's hanging. That's what happened there. I forgot your second question, sorry.
The cost of the drugs.
The cost, yeah.
The hospital version for humane and that.
Yeah, well, I'm like, so what's happening is that all of the pharmaceutical companies, they don't want their drugs being used for this.
For which?
For lethal injection.
Okay.
They don't want their drugs being used. It's the longest chapter of the book. It's called The Drug Supplier Saga. Abby Brooks at NBC News, who keeps trying to push, she's like, we should do something national, and she's trying, and she said that's her favorite chapter. But they, because I document how they really, really don't want their drugs used for this. They've been sued for botched executions using their drugs. Milan had $50 or $60 million divested because they didn't have controls on their drugs. They do now. And so, it's against their financial interest and, of course, their corporate core values. But you don't have to believe in their corporate core values to understand that, no, they really, really don't want their drugs being used in this way. And so what has happened is two things. One, so they put contractual provisions on their sales. They call these end user agreements. So in order to buy their drugs, you have to actually sign a contract saying, I'm not going to use this to kill. Okay, fine. But what's happened is the states are now making surreptitious, fraudulent purchases, trying to get around those. So I've got a quote in the book. It's an email. from the Department of Corrections in Ohio to, I think it's like the Department of Health and Human Services, something like that. It's over their Veterans Affairs Department. And the email says, when you ask them to buy the drugs, don't tell them you're going to give them to us. And don't tell them what it's going to be used for, because there's contractual provisions on the sales. And so they are, I mean, in Nevada, they had the drugs sent to a location 200 miles away from the prison to further the ruse. And so what's happening is the states are, or the pharmaceutical companies are finding out, and they're suing. They're suing the Departments of Corrections. And by the way, then you have hundreds and thousands of dollars in litigation costs. And who's paying for all that? We are. You bet. We are. So, you know, it's like, in some ways it's the same drugs, it's just they're getting it illegally. I mean, it's truly illegally. And then the other thing they're doing is going to compounding pharmacies. And so I think there's been 5 or 6 compounding pharmacies unveiled, and I go over each one of them. You know, I'm like, here's the first one. They had 1,800 regulatory violations. You know, and so, I mean, the problems are just so voluminous. In Texas, I wrote about one compounding pharmacy, and he was like, well, the guy from the Department of Corrections pulled up in an unmarked car, gave me a bag of powder. There's no directions with it. There's no... Who knows? You know, where it's coming from. So the, you know, but what we do know is that to get those drugs on the black market, they're paying through the nose from those. So it's not so much the cost of the drug, it's, you know, you're not supposed to have them. And so I'm going to have to find a pharmacy or a hospital that will sell me some on the side. I learned when I went through Tennessee that they have found some pentobarbital mixed in with the street drugs. So pentobarbital is the one drug protocol that Tennessee uses. And it's getting those drugs on the sly. And, you know, once you're outside the regulatory network, once you're in the black market, they're in the black market. So now they're hitting the streets too. So I have a whole section in the book where I say, this matters to you. Don't care about them? I do. Don't care about them? Let me tell you all the ways this actually matters to you. Yeah. Should we stop? Okay, thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm happy to talk more, but these are hard issues, and my heart goes out to the people on the front lines, because as I'm talking about my research, they're you know, those are real people. Oh, and you know what? I did not mention, I need to shout out, this is Bailey Ellicott, and Bailey is not only at the CHU doing this work and has lost 4 clients this year, but Bailey is a graduate of University of Richmond Law School. She was my research assistant. I had research assistants every year for those 7 years, and she was the one that brought this project home. And I'll tell you, I was under the gun and didn't know if I'd get it done, and Bailey was like, we got this, Professor Lain. I'll do it. And I was talking to her tonight, and she was like, I did make a lot of money, because, you know, we pay them. And I was like, it was a lot of hours. She was like, I made good money. I was like, okay. But, you know, this book, there were times where I was like, I don't know, is it going to be okay? And Bailey was like, I got you, and did really important work, and continues to do really important work. So, anyway, got to shout her out. Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you.
It is, I saw that. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Well, first of all, oh, it's, she's very sensitive.
I know.